how the winter plays out and how the sap comes out of the ground. Sometimes in early season sap, you can also struggle with manganese fouling. Usually you know when you're having manganese fouling issues because the flow meters of the machine, or the concentrate flow meter on the machine starts to turn red, pink, brown color. It's usually manganese that the trees are picking up in early season sap and it's fouling the membranes. You can see a machine, when you start getting manganese fouling, you'll see machine performance just tank, and so it won't bring it back at all. And then you need to be doing acid washes. Citric acid works pretty good for manganese. Muriatic acid works a little bit better, but muriatic acid is a lot more sensitive, or the machines are a lot more sensitive to the muriatic acid. So we generally don't recommend people use muriatic acid in their smaller ROs because you can wreck things a lot faster, just because you don't have the volume of water there to dilute the acid out. Generally, after you do your soap wash, if you want to do your permeability testing, you run the machine at the same pressure. We generally recommend 100 or 200 psi. Doesn't really matter what the pressure is, just as long as it's the same every time. You have the machine running at that pressure, then you watch the amount of flow coming out of the membranes, and you record that. Always record that. Then when you see a 10 to 15% reduction in that after the first and second soap wash, then you need to start thinking about doing an acid wash. To do that acid wash, the principles are the same as the soap wash, except for the fact that we can leave the acid sit in the machine. Soap washes, generally, you want to rinse that soap out. Not that it's going to wreck the machine in any way, but usually we want to get that soap rinsed out of the machine. Acid, you can leave sit in the machine for pretty long periods of time. Citric acid, in the chart it says 16 to 48 hours. We've left our big machines sit for weeks with citric acid in the membranes. The citric acid isn't strong enough to ever damage anything in the machine or the membrane. It's also not very active on stainless steel, so we don't have to worry about it doing any of the metal in the machine. But we want to, leave it soaked for a long period of time. The longer it soaks, the more it's going to pick up. When we do our long acid soaks, the other thing we do is generally start the machine up and let it recirculate for 15, 20 minutes every day. Just kind of helps keep things moving inside that machine. It puts fresh acid water against the membrane. Any membrane or any mineral that's picked up from that membrane, it gets moved away from the membrane. So that way we kind of keep that acid just as active as possible. Sometimes we even add more acid into the machine as it's sitting. We want the pH to be down in that 3-ish range with an acid wash. And as I mentioned with the soap, when the pH comes down on the soap, pH with the acid will come up over time. Add a little bit more acid to it in a couple days, bring the pH back down, recirculate it again, and you'll just get the most out of that acid wash. As it says here, we can use that acid magic with a muriatic in any RO. It won't wreck any machine. You can't leave that sit though. As soon as that acid wash cycle is over with, we need to be getting that muriatic acid out of the machine. We need to get it rinsed, and we want to do a soap wash right away to neutralize any acid that got left in that machine, so that we're not ruining any of the hard parts. The membranes aren't going to get wrecked from that acid magic. The stainless steel in the pumps, that can take some damage from that muriatic acid. So we don't want to be leaving that set in the machine. Also, it's not mentioned here, but anytime we do an acid wash, we want to do a soap wash right after. We want to make sure we neutralize all the acid inside that machine so that we're not having problems. The caustics are not corrosive to the inside of the RO. Some of the acids can be corrosive to the inside of the RO, so we just want to make sure that it's neutralized out. And as noted down at the bottom, make sure you always follow the pH parameters for your specific membranes. When you buy a machine or you buy new membranes for your existing machine, make sure you ask wherever you're buying those membranes from, or that machine from, what are the specific low and high pH parameters of that machine. Generally on the low side, we don't have to worry about it too much, but on the high side, that's a concern because you can overshoot when you add soap. Most of the soaps sold by all the major maple equipment manufacturers are buffered soaps, so you can overshoot them, but it's very hard. You have to add, on orders of magnitude too much soap, but third-party soaps and some of the smaller, I would say short-line manufacturers and suppliers of equipment and chemical don't always offer buffered pH or buffered soap, so that can be more of a problem. Soap you're going to get from any of the major equipment manufacturers should all be buffered soap. It's not an issue. But it's another question to ask your supplier, whoever you're buying your supplies from, just ask if it's buffered soap, and they'll be able to tell you. Not that it's a big deal for most of you guys with your smaller machines, but more and more folks are pushing to that higher and higher concentrate level. So there's just some things to think about. The higher concentrate levels do reduce boiling time, labor, size of evaporator necessary, but it changes some things with your sugar house flow as well. Generally, the biggest thing you hear is the pans get a lot dirtier a lot faster because you concentrate the sugar and you also concentrate the minerals in the sap. The other thing, the RO looks better, the numbers look better, the higher the concentrate you go. But you want to kind of keep it within the parameters of your equipment. Old drop through evaporators don't like high concentrate as good as new high efficiency evaporators that are built for it. And flue pans are expensive. So, just stay within the parameters of what your equipment and the total sugar house can handle. Don't try putting 20% bricks into a 1980 King, drop through evaporator because you're not going to have anything fun to say about that experience if you try doing something like that. Generally, it does change what's happening to your syrup as it's coming off the evaporator as well. You can change how the syrup filters, changes how fast the syrup comes off, so you may need to change your filtering method coming off the evaporator, also what you're doing with the storage, or with syrup storage. The other thing is the concentrate cannot be held around near as long, going from 10 to 20. The concentrate spoils 4 to 5 times faster, so we need to make sure we're just getting the concentrate process as fast as possible. So the other thing we had mentioned before was using your RO to recirculate sap and increase your storage capacity. Using the RO to recirculate sap is a good way to bring the sugar up in the sap. Also, if you want to recirculate for a while before you run it through the machine, you can get higher concentrates out of that machine. That, if your machine's only capable of doubling the amount of sugar in that sap, if you recirculate for a while and then run it through the machine, instead of getting 4% out, you can get 6% out or 8% out of that machine. But you spend time warming all that sap up and recirculating that around, concentrating those bacteria. So you need to make sure that you have a plan of action to get that tank emptied that night as you're boiling, so that it doesn't sit around till the next day or the next day after that. It talks about just how fast the concentrate spoils there. The other thing to think about is how clean your tanks are. If you're recirculating into a tank that hasn't been cleaned for 2, 3, 4 days, everything's going to spoil that much faster because you just got that much more bacteria. The general rule is if it's got concentrate in it, it needs to be cleaned every day. Sap tanks, sometimes you can get away with not cleaning them every day. At the end of the season, generally you have to be cleaning them every day because they build up faster. But we want to make sure with concentrate especially that things are clean, that it's touching, because not only is it going to be spoiling faster, we can also have issues with off flavor and issues with it going ropey in the concentrate tank. I've seen guys lose tanks of concentrate during the middle of a boiling day. It goes from okay in the morning to bad in the concentrate tank by lunchtime because that tank wasn't clean, and it's also generally elevated in the sugar house where it's warmer. Everything grows faster. That tank has been warming up all day. It's just something we need to be cognizant of. If you are going to be recirculating sap, you need to think about the flow of how that's going to work out. It's nice to build manifolds on the wall, but even if you've got everything set up with cam lock couplers on your machine so you can hook and unhook the hoses, generally makes it easy to do. Pulling hoses out of tanks and moving them to other tanks can sometimes be a real pain. And also, it's easy to forget that a hose is or is not in the tank when you hook up to it. So I like to make things simple because not only is simple easy to operate, simple is less likely to put sap or concentrate on the ground. It really sucks when you start the RO, leave it run for 45 minutes, and then go check your head tank and realize all the concentrate you just made in the last 45 minutes is now on the ground running away from your sugar house down to the creek. Most of us that have had an RO had that experience at least once. Not that everybody will admit it, but it's happened to pretty much everybody. As it says there again, just make sure to empty and clean your tanks, especially if you're recirculating sap, so you're not having that bacterial blowing over you. Generally, our end of season washes, we want to be very aggressively washing that machine, so we're putting it away clean. Also, we want to make sure that the membranes are in as good a shape as possible before putting the machine away. So it's not February 1st next year, we've got our trees tapped and we realize we've got a membrane issue, then we either need to get new membranes or spend some time cleaning them up as we're busy getting everything else ready for syrup season. But generally, this is the process I follow when I'm washing any machine up at the end of syrup season. Sometimes we'll even do more soap washes and more acid washes and repeat this process a few times over to get the machine where we want it. If we know we've got acid washes that need to continually happen to get mineral out of that RO, sometimes we'll skip that soap wash at the bottom, do another acid wash. see where things end up, maybe skip the next soap wash and do another acid wash to get that machine as clean as possible. Membranes do get to the point where you can't clean them anymore. Usually that's bacterial fouling that causes that, not mineral fouling. If you let the bacteria grow for too long and you get the biofilm building up in the membrane, sometimes you just can't get that out regardless of what you do with that machine. After you get the machine as clean as what you think it needs to be to get put away, we want to make sure we check the permeate flow rates. So do that benchmark test I mentioned before, where you run the machine at a known pressure, 100 or 200 psi, and track and write down how much permeate is coming out of each membrane. By doing that, we can just make sure that that membrane is flowing as good as we think it is, actually. Make sure, just that our membranes are in as good a shape as possible. A lot of producers like to put glycol or the sodium metabisulfate membrane preservative in their machines. We're seeing more and more big producers getting away from that and just going to rinsing their machines every month or so. The nice thing about rinsing your machine every month or so is that machine is going to run, and if there's issues, you remember them and you realize them if things go bad in the off season. Generally, smaller sugar makers, it's not quite as practical to do because everything doesn't stay set up and ready to roll in the sugar house all year long. So we see more producers putting the glycol and the sodium metabisulfate in their machines or in their membranes. Some machines can be stored with the membrane in them. Some machines you need to remove the membrane from the machine. That would be a question to ask wherever you bought your RO from, the manufacturer of your RO, if it can be stored with the membranes in it. But it makes the storage a lot easier. If the membranes can be stored in the machine, I would recommend not taking them out of the machine because it's just extra work you need to do. The 4-inch machines in specific, those black caps that go in the end of the pressure vessels, are kind of a pain to take out. It's also very easy to wreck those seals when you're taking them out. You do need to pull the membrane out of the machine. This is going to sound like the farmer fix or the farmer way to do this, but I generally actually use the machine to get the membrane out of it. So I'll start the machine up, take the end caps or the clamps off of those pressure vessels, and then build a little bit of pressure with it until it starts to push them up. I don't want to blow them out of the machine, but I actually use the machine to build a little pressure and push them out. It's the best way to get them out without damaging them. If you start using screwdrivers to pry them out of there, they'll start wrecking that plastic, and you'll wreck those O-rings pretty easily. So I actually like to use the machine and build a little pressure, just kind of give them a little push up and out. Just make sure you don't build all of the pressure, because those caps will come all the way out and end up, laying on the floor of your sugar house, and you will wreck something that way too. If you put the machine away with glycol at the beginning of the season, or at the end of the season when you start up with the next season, we want to make sure we rinse that and then do that hot water wash without soap. Sometimes if you use soap right away with the glycol, it can be really hard to get out. There's something chemically that happens with the sodium hydroxide soap and the glycol, and it gets to be really hard to get out. So we want to make sure, again, give it a hot water wash without soap, rinsing before and after that wash to get all the glycol out of that machine before we do our soap wash. That hot water wash for soap is just kind of to make sure everything is as clean as possible. Should be not much more bacteria inside that machine, but we want to make sure. Sometimes machines don't get put away as good as what we hope, or we didn't use quite as much preservative as what we thought we were using, and it doesn't smell very good coming out of the machine. That's when we want to be a little bit more aggressive with our soap washes to make sure that we're not making off flavored syrup. So when you start that machine up and you rinse it the first time, if it smells like a sewer coming out of the machine, do a soap wash. Do a really good soap wash. Just make sure that we're not making any off flavored syrup. You want what's coming out of that machine to smell good. That's generally how I determine if I think I've got the machine rinsed enough, or if I think the machine is washed up enough. Smell the rinse water. If there's any sort of contamination, be it bacterial or chemical contamination, you'll smell it in the rinse water before anything. And then again, we want to be checking the permeability test on that machine, just to make sure it's where it needs to be before the season starts. That way, if some sort of issue develops in the off season, we know about it. The other thing I should mention when we check our permeate flow test is if they've grown significantly. So if they've decreased significantly, that's obviously a problem because the membrane isn't performing where it should. But if we went from benchmarking at 3 gallons a minute of flow on permeate, and all of a sudden now we're benchmarking at 5 or 6 gallons a minute of flow, that's just as much of an indication of an issue. And those issues mean that you're going to be passing sugar. Something has happened inside that membrane. Either it's frozen, or there's some sort of a crack crack inside that membrane, and we're going to be starting to pass sugar. We like to check our machines to make sure they're not passing sugar at the beginning of the season once we start running concentrate. Usually if a machine is passing sugar, it's almost not detectable with a hydrometer. So what we do is we take that permeate, we take a known amount, if we take a quart of permeate or whatever is a permeate, I boil it down on the stove to much less known amounts. If we take a quart, maybe I'll boil it down to half a cup of permeate on the stove, and then I'll check if there's a refract down. And if we're seeing something reading on it, then we've got an issue. First thing to go after if you ever do see your machine passing sugar is the O-rings in the machine. There is permeate O-rings where the permeate tube comes out of the membrane and goes into the end cap of the machine. Usually if we're seeing it pass sugar, those O-rings got cut by taking the membrane in and out of the machine. It's pretty rare that you see membranes get damaged in any way other than freezing or hard mechanical impact. They get dropped or something happens to them crushed. But usually when you see a machine passing sugar, it's going to be an O-ring somewhere that's allowing that sap to get past it. Membranes, when they fail, usually fail the other way. They get tighter, they get more built up with stuff. They don't get looser over time, they get tighter and more built up. So I guess with that being said, does anybody have any questions about anything with an RO?
When you were talking there about doing a 1 monthly wash and stuff after the season and stuff, are you using permeate water or are you using just well water?
So we keep as much permeate as absolutely possible at the end of the season. So we have our general permeate tank full. We'll fill 1 or 2 of our other sap tanks with permeate. We keep as absolutely much permeate around as possible. So we use permeate generally till Christmas. Now, this year, I think it was in December when I used up the last of the permeate rinsing the machines. So now I haven't rinsed them since that time, but I will probably do them here at the beginning of February. We probably won't make any syrup till the first or second week of March where we are in northern Wisconsin, but I'll make some permeate, so I'll run and fill up our 5,000 gallon tank with well water and then fire up one of the machines, run it through the machine, make some permeate, and then use that to run through the machines. Our well water is pretty hard, so I like to make sure it's RO before I put it through, before I use it to rinse the machine. If you've got really soft, good well water, in all honesty, you don't need to be running it through the machine even. It's just when you've got real hard water that you want to make sure that you're not taking the minerals out of your well water and building those in, putting those into your machine like sap minerals would. A little counterproductive to be getting it more mineralized up with your water instead of less mineralized up. So that's just kind of how we do it.
So in reality then, so if you're running like a 250 RO, how many gallons of permeate would you keep after the season then?
If you have the storage, a 250 RO, if you've got 500 gallons of permeate around, that should be able to get you through the season. Sometimes you'll see the permeate start to get a little scuzzy as it sits around longer and longer. We put a little bit of hydrogen peroxide in our permeate. It sits around and it stays good. Our tanks are stainless steel plastic tanks. You'll see it go bad a little bit faster because the plastic holds the bacteria. But if you put a couple teaspoons of hydrogen peroxide in that water, it helps a lot keep the bacteria down. Because if you can keep the bacteria down, that water will keep theoretically forever, but in reality, it'll keep a year if you just keep the bacteria from growing in it.
Do you know how many gallons it would take to rinse for 10 minutes?
That depends on your machine a lot and the pumps that are on that machine. The little micro tubes we sell in 10 minutes, if you leave that thing run wide open, those pumps will flow a lot of water, but not every machine is that way. It depends on if they're turbo pumps or faucet displacement pumps, to be honest with you. And also what pressure you're running at. I generally, when I rinse the micros, slow them down a little bit just so you don't smoke through the water quite so fast to get a little bit better rinse. But if you've got lots of water, that's not going to hurt anything. So the hard question to answer without knowing what machine, to be honest. So changing pre-filters, we generally will run the pre-filters until they get too plugged up, they don't wash. We don't take pre-filters out at the end of the day when we run a wash cycle. We just run them through, usually clean the pre-filters up. Some of the machines nowadays, the bigger machines in specific are built with separate pre-filters for the washing. So what you end up doing is you change some valves and use separate pre-filters that you run the wash water through. That's nice for 2 reasons. Number one, you've got filters that soap stays in, so it doesn't take quite as much to rinse that soap out of them. The other thing is you can run tighter pre-filters with your washing. When I was running my 600 gallon hour machine, I had a separate wash filter I would put in there, and we used 1 micron filters for wash filters. Those tighter filters trap more bacteria and more stuff that's coming out of the machine when you're washing it, and we got better washes out of the machine by doing that. So it is really dependent on the machine, but generally you can run the pre-filters as long as possible until you either start noticing them, that you're not getting the machine rinsed out. If it seems to take a lot longer to rinse the machine, or you notice after you rinse it, it still smells a little bit funny, first place to check is your pre-filter because they do grow some bacteria over time. Excuse me. But usually you can run pre-filters as long as possible. As long as, until they get plugged up, you can't get liquid. You can't get enough liquid through to keep that machine running at its optimal capacity.
I'm running the micro too. So you're saying the pre-filter, then I run a wash cycle with the wash chemical.
Yep.
Leave that same filter in there and then go back to run the circuit.
Yep, you can go back to running SAP as long as you rinse it enough to get the soap rinsed out of that pre-filter.
What you recommend, which is
Yeah.
160 some gallons each cycle.
Yeah, you should be getting soap rinsed out of that filter, no problem. There's really no reason to be chucking pre-filters, especially, I mean, on that machine, if you've got 1,000 gallons of SAP through that pre-filter, that's nowhere close to plugged up. So you can use that pre-filter a second or third time. Our big machine takes 10 of the 20 inch pre-filters, and we generally switch those every 2 to 3 days. Gets less and less at the end of the season because the SAP gets dirty and dirty. But at the beginning of the season, we went, I'm trying to think, we probably went 4 or 5 run cycles with that machine without changing the pre-filters at times. And just as long as you change it when they get dirty. And also, if you notice anything, I generally will pop it open after about every wash cycle and go and smell the filters and make sure they don't smell. If they smell, obviously we're chucking them right away. But if they don't smell, you're not, there's no issues there. Probably gonna sell less pre-filters now. It's okay, they've increased in price pretty dramatically in the last 2 years anyways. Any other questions?